Hello, and welcome to Building Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hart, aka Jeffrey the Natural Builder. Building Sustainability consists of conversations with designers, builders, makers, dreamers, and doers, exploring the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. This is episode 31 and features a conversation with publisher, photographer, builder, documenter, and blogger Lloyd Kahn. Before introducing Lloyd, I just want to tell you about an upcoming event. That is Earth Building UK and Ireland, EBUKI, are holding their annual Clayfest conference online this year. For anyone interested in the world of earth building, it is a fantastic event, normally held in person. This year, due to the big C, it is obviously online. But that has meant that the range of talks can be from further afield. So there's people talking about the Cob construction building code in the USA, talking about flood-resistant earth construction in Pakistan. Bill and Athena Steen, the most influential straw bale builders and clay specialists, they're giving a talk. Really, it's a whole host of fascinating and inspiring talks from the range of earth builders. So if you want to get involved, it's a 2-day event from the 27th to the 28th of November 2020. You can find out more details at ebuki.co and then follow the link to Clayfest 2020. Also, if you'd like to support this podcast, you can at our Patreon site, patreon.com/building sustainability. You can give as little as you want, and anything is greatly appreciated. Or if you pledge to £5 a month, I will send you a hand-carved wooden spoon. Yes, that's right. As a reward for your subscription, you get to listen to bonus interviews, little extra snippets from conversations, including from this one. And you also get to ask questions of the upcoming guests. I've just put a list of the next couple of months' worth of interviews, and you can get involved and read a little bit about them and then ask questions that I will pose to the guest. So you can really get involved and be part of the podcast. If this is your first time here, make sure you check out the previous episodes. You might well like episode 10, Flo's Tiny House. There's an episode on Japanese clay plastering with Emily Reynolds. Earth Floors with Sukita Ray Krimmel. Lots of things, all to do with building, sustainability, and a kind of holistic side notes on sustainability of yourself and of other interesting things. Please do subscribe if you're listening to this on the website. You can do that through the links to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you normally get your podcasts. So, Lloyd Kahn, I'm so very excited to share this conversation with you. And it really was a thrill to talk to Lloyd. His books have been so influential in my building career. I remember my initial training in Acre in Oregon, and we'd always have Lloyd's books out on the table, and we'd spend many, many evenings poring through the images and just absorbing all of that inspiration. And I don't actually know a single natural builder that hasn't been hugely inspired by his books. He really has shaped a generation of builders and inspired us to look at form and materials in construction. So if Lloyd's name is new to you, then I suggest you head over to shelterpub.com, which is the Shelter Publications website, and have a look through all of the books that are available there. I can highly recommend getting hold of any of those books. The Tiny Homes book was especially influential in my life and homework. And Lloyd does say that the sales of books has really dropped off in recent years. So if you do know anyone that's interested in building, Christmas is coming. Maybe you should get them a book. And hopefully that will keep Lloyd producing more of his wonderful books. That is about it from me. Oh, I do need to tell you that there are a couple of swears in this episode and also some drug references. Right, I'll be back at the end. Enjoy the conversation.
In 1958 to 1960, I ran a newspaper in the Air Force on an Air Force base in Germany, the Sembach Jet Gazette. And then in 1960, I got out of the Air Force and I worked as an insurance broker in San Francisco for 5 years. Until in 1964, I started smoking pot. And so that was pretty much the key to ending my business career. And in 1965, I took what you might call a vision quest. I rode the rails partly, jumped on freight trains and hitchhiked across the country. And that was at the height of a very exciting time in 1965 when everything was changing really fast. And I spent a month and I came back to San Francisco and I quit my job. And I went to work I worked as a carpenter for about 10 years. And then I got into building domes. And I built domes for about 5 years. And I was kind of the person that they came to when they wanted the press. Life magazine. My dome was in Life magazine. And
the dome that you lived in.
Well, I lived in a couple of domes. The first dome I built was I built a house in Big Sur, which is a kind of a well-known area south of San Francisco with high mountains and waves breaking on the rocky beaches. And I built a house down there, and then I built a dome as a workshop. That was the first real-size dome I built, and then I moved to a so-called alternative high school campus in the mountains, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and for 2 years we built 17 geodesic domes there over the course of 2 years. And then I left there and I came to the town where I now live, and I built a dome here, which was a really nice looking dome. And that was the last dome that I built, and I decided to sell it. I took it apart and sold it, and then built the house that we now live in. So anyway, so I guess I worked as a builder for about 10 years, and then I ended up working on the Whole Earth catalog, which I recommend all young people look it up on Wikipedia because it was such an important thing in the 60s. And I became the shelter editor. And the Whole Earth catalog had, it listed all the things that people were interested in then, building your own house, making your own shoes, organic gardening, communication with dolphins, science fiction, just all the many things that were very exciting to people in the countercultural revolution. So I worked on that book and I learned how to make books. And then the first 2 books that I published were on dome building. So that's how I got into publishing. And so I've been a publisher now for about 50 years. And I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a publisher. I'm also a writer and a photographer and an editor. And in a small company like ours, we have to do a lot of different things. And so I may be coming to the end of a trail here where we haven't been making any money for the last 3 years, and I don't know if it just maybe after all this time it's okay. Well, time to do something else. I don't know. I'm doing one more book for sure, which is called Rolling Homes, and I'm really excited about that. We did a book called Tiny Homes on the Move about 6 years ago, and it was subtitle was Wheels and Water, and so the wheels part of it was the vans, pickup truck with campers, house buses, trailers, and the water part of it was houseboats and sailboats. So now we're doing another book on nomadic rigs, and and there's an awful lot of information out now on especially vans. And so, but our book, just yesterday, I put up a post on my Instagram account of a nice camper on the back of a pickup truck with a copper roof and portholes in it, and said, "We're doing this new book. Do you have any unique vehicles?" And I'm swamped this morning. I've got like 15 people have sent me, really interesting vehicles that are not like any of the stuff that I see in the books that are out now on the subject, like van life. So anyway, so bringing it all, around to, being a newspaper editor, and then an insurance broker, and then a builder, and then the building got me into publishing. And so now since Shelter, we've done 8 or 9 books on building. Each one of them has about 1,000 photographs in them. And the book Homework, which came out in 2004, was actually the sequel to Shelter, 40 years later. And a lot of the buildings in Homework were inspired by Shelter. And so then these different, and we call it the Shelter library of building books.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the other thing that I've done in publishing is for 20 years, I did books on fitness, including the book Stretching by Bob Anderson, which has sold 3 million copies, and a book on running and a book on weight training. And so I think that was my karma. I can explain things in simple terms to people, and I could explain these guys. I could explain lifting weights or running, and so and those books have really financed our other books. The Stretching book has been half of our income for 40 years now, and it's like Vittorio De Sica was a filmmaker before your time. He made films in Italy, and he also acted in films in Hollywood. And he was a very handsome guy. And he was in one movie with Ingrid Bergman, and they were Technicolor movies, kind of light romantic comedies. And he'd make a lot of money, and then he'd go back to Italy, and he did films like The Bicycle Thief, which was a scratchy black and white film, which a lot of people consider the best film of all time. So I kind of think of that, and the fitness books have paid for these other books, the building books, which really don't pay for themselves. And so that's worked up until now, but I don't know if that's going to work from now on.
Oh, well, I hope you find a way, because the building books, they've inspired not only me, but I don't know a natural builder that isn't massively inspired or hasn't. You find them on their coffee tables, and yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I'm interested to know, you when you became a builder, what was it that drew you to using your hands?
Well, when I was 12, my father built a house up in he bought some land and converted it into a rice farm in the Sacramento Valley. He had 488 acres, and so he built a house out of concrete blocks. It was 8 miles out of town, and so my job when I was 12 was to shovel sand and gravel and cement into the concrete mixer, and I liked doing that. And it was real hot. We'd go up and work on weekends, and then we poured the floor, concrete floor, foundation floor, and we had a couple of stonemasons came and laid the blocks for the wall, and we put rebar in the blocks and poured grout in the blocks so that it was really strong. And then came time to put the roof on, and we were putting the roof on the carport, and they gave me a cloth carpenter's apron and a hammer and nails, and I got to go up and nail down the sheathing on the roof. And that was kind of one of those moments, when I thought I was up there, the sun was shining, and I liked the smell of the wood, and pounding the nails in felt really good. And so I thought I really liked doing this. And then when I was 18, I got a job working on the docks in San Francisco as a carpenter. for a shipwright. It was rough carpentry. The ships would come in when San Francisco was actually a port town in the 50s and not a tourist town. The ships would come in and they would load up with cargo in the holds of the ships, which were in the center, and then we would go in with wood framing and frame in the cargo so that it didn't shift around. And so I worked a couple of years doing that, and then when I got out of the Air Force in 1960, we had a piece of land about 3/4 of an acre in Mill Valley, which is a small town across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco, and I started building. And so I was an insurance broker, but I gradually started spending more and more time building, coming home, getting off work early, coming home and working till it was dark, and working on the weekends. And then, so by the time I quit the insurance job, I'd had a fair amount of building experience, and so I went to work as a builder then, and probably more as an owner builder, but I did work for other people, and as I say, for 10 years before I got into publishing.
You were saying about being on the roof. I distinctly remember the first time I was fixing a roof down on a building I'd built, and there was something about, I think, being up high, being on a thing that you've made that's supporting your weight.
Exactly.
It's a very empowering moment, and I can well relate.
I find that when I step on the floor after I've done a lot of concrete work, so that's probably the part of building I understand best is the foundation and high concrete walls, and so. But when I put down the subfloor, when I stand on the floor, that's like, wow, I made this happen here. It's just a wonderful feeling, and it probably is, in our genes, providing food and shelter.
Yeah.
And so, and I like it. I like working with my hands, and I like builders the same way I like farmers. I've never met a farmer that I guess there probably are some, but I pretty much like all farmers and all builders because they're dealing with the real world. They're not figuring out how to get the lowest price on pork bellies or options, or they're not lawyers or money manipulators. The farmers have to deal with the wind and the weather and the rainfall, and the same thing with builders. And a building, I tell people, don't build a house based on an abstract concept like a dome. There's no reason that you should put this geodesic dome, which it's the same whether you're building it in Alaska or Kenya, the same geometry, without any consideration for the local conditions. And so, so that look around and see what has been done in your area, and maybe consider that as a starting point. But that even with the roundhouse, I built a chicken coop here with a living roof, they call it. I used to call it sod roof, but it was really a lot of work to have that living roof. I mean, the framing had to be much stronger. And I was thinking, I'm not so sure. I like the living roof and everything, but if I had put up just a shed roof, I would be through by now. And so all those things, I come back to the fact that I've learned that as far as an owner builder goes, I want to get a shelter built that feels good and that is built out of local materials, and that is suitable to our needs. But I don't want to spend all my life doing it. If I build a 7-sided house or a cob house or any of these things that are a living roof, it's going to really take me a lot longer. And so I kind of got back to thinking that here's what I want to do. I'm going to build a pretty simple stud frame house, although I can't help myself because the last little thing I did, a 10 by 10 building, I built it with a curved roof. And I'll tell you, that curved roof was so much more complicated than just a shed roof. Although once I got it finished, it's finished for good and it's beautiful and feels really good. So, but I kind of backed away from a lot of what we did in the 60s, where you designed, you built a house based on a concept, and that concept may not have been practical. And so that I kind of got to this point, well, okay, if you want to build a house based on a stellated dodecahedron, or an ellipse, or a curve, or a sphere, you know, okay, you can do it, but it's going to take you a fuck of a lot of time. And for me, I want to get the house built and live in it and then get on with my life. So that's what I kind of tell people these days, you know, and I've written about that. We have this book called The Half Acre Homestead. And in the back of that book, I wrote something that it could actually be in more than that book, but here's what I would do nowadays if I were to, looking back on, you know, 60 years of building. Here's my experience, and I hope that this is useful to you.
Yeah.
You know, and I could have saved myself a lot of time, you know, if somebody had pointed this out to me back then. You know.
I think that's really funny, because I think so much of what's inspiring in your books is those labors of love, those you know, extreme things that have obviously taken a long time and been really detailed, and you know, have used like the crazy branches or something really sort of intricate, and then having, you know, spent your life sort of documenting and seeing all this, you're sort of, for yourself, you'd say, yeah, we'll go simple.
Well, you know, there's a lot of simple stuff, and people tend to think of the unique buildings in these books, but the heart of Shelter was tiny homes. In the middle of the book, we drew 5 little houses. We drew every stick of wood in the house, every stud, every rafter, every joist, a flat roof, a shallow gable roof, a steep gable roof, a shed roof, and a round building. And we said then, you know, if you're going to build on a piece of land, build a little place like this to camp out in, or if you don't have an Airstream trailer, you know, the very best thing to do if you have a piece of land would be to live on the land for a year and watch where the wind comes from and where the sun sets in the winter, and then decide how to build your house. But there are really very simple buildings in all of our books, and and there are some very fanciful creations, that's true. But in the latest book we did, well, the one before the Half Acre Homestead is called Small Homes. There's a lot of very simple things in there. You know, people fixing up old houses. A guy in Kansas fixed up his garage and moved into it and rented his house out. And it's not anything fancy, you know, but it's, you know, things like that. Or 2 families in San Francisco bought a home together in the most, you know, high-priced real estate market in the world, and turned it into a duplex legally with the city. So you have 2 people buying a house, it cuts your cost in half right there. Or a guy in Los Angeles who bought a house for $200,000, which is ultra cheap in LA, and which was falling apart, and fixed it up, you know. And those aren't fanciful, you know, things. And so anyway, in the back of the Half Acre Homestead, I said, okay, you know, here's what I would do if I were starting from scratch. And actually, I would love to be starting. I'm 85 years old now, and I would love to start from scratch, and you know, and do all these things that I've learned, but I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to do that. The thing is, I'm really happy with where we live because we're on the ocean, and it's so expensive. But our place, we've never borrowed any money from the bank, and we've never paid any rent, and we could sell our house for a lot of money, but there's no place that we could go where we would be able to live on the ocean, unless we go way north where it rains a lot. So I'm kind of stuck here. So I don't think I'll get to build another house. So all I can do is say to people, you know, here's what I would do if I were to start over.
Sure.
You know?
So I mean, I'm interested, especially hearing that, to know how did you get into domes? Like, what was, because that's very much the opposite. That's
well, we used to go listen to Buckminster Fuller in I'd say maybe in the '63 or so, and he was definitely the inspiration, and it sounded good. And I never did well in mathematics, and so a geodesic dome is based on an icosahedron, and I learned that that was one of the 5 basic solids. You know, a tetrahedron, octahedron, cube, dodecahedron, icosahedron. So for me, that was really exciting it was kind of like a visual way to understand geometry. So that part of it was really fun. And then we got the mathematics. When I was living in Big Sur, they're called chord factors, the mathematics for the dome structural members, the struts, and the angles to cut them at were hard to find. There was Popular Science had an issue one year called the Sun Dome, and they gave the measurements. And so a bunch of us built domes using those measurements. And I started with models, and it was really fun. I loved doing it, you know, and I'm indebted to domes for my interest in you know, geometrical shapes. It led to other things. So that was part of it. And then it seemed like Fuller talked about this being a way to house humanity, that it was a more efficient way to utilize materials. It turned out to not be true. But we thought, you know, a lot of things, we were turning the world upside down. We were looking, you know, Timothy Leary said, turn on, tune in, and drop out. So what he meant was smoke some pot or take some acid and take another look at reality. Get off your left brain into your right brain and look at the world with increased understanding, and so once you've done that, then tune in, meaning look around at the state of things, which we did. Things were pretty stagnant, and drop out, you know, and drop out. Quit what you're doing and do something else. And that was pretty much true. So, you know, we were looking around at ways to, organic farming came out of this time. There were a lot of really good things: ecology, political awareness, communication with dolphins, doing stuff for yourself. All those things there was a period there in the 60s and 70s when it was so easy to get by in America and probably in Europe. It was so inexpensive to live that you could try stuff out. It's totally different now. I mean, in 1971, I bought my land here for $6,000, and the building permit was $200. Well, you get a building permit now, it's $50,000 where I live. Oof. You know, for the Coastal Commission but it doesn't matter because everybody's a millionaire that's building, so they don't care. So, so the domes were part of that, looking at the world and thinking of ways we could do things better. And so my role in I tried to make domes be as aesthetically acceptable as possible, to not just be plastic and metal, but to have rugs in them and plants in them, and that's kind of what I did. And the dome that I built here was covered with shakes, which I split from redwood, driftwood I got from the beach. And I think it was the most beautiful dome ever built in the world by far. It was really pretty. It was used wood, and the connectors inside were silver looking, and yet it was, it was just too frustrating because I couldn't add on to it. I couldn't subdivide it, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but if people are interested in domes, if they go to our website, shelterpub.com, and scroll down to the bottom to domes, you'll see I wrote a thing called Refried Domes years later. It was a newsprint publication, and it said, okay, you want to build domes, here's all the reasons I think that they don't work, but also here are the mathematics. You want to, I'm not going to.
So if you want to do it, but here's why you shouldn't.
And so I think I really got into publishing, now that I think of it, because back in the 60s, so I discovered domes. That was a big thing, and people started writing me letters asking me for the map. So I'd write them letters back, and I'm thinking, well, I'm writing the same letter over and over again. Why don't I just print something, in a mimeograph machine? And while I'm at it, why don't I throw in the stuff that I have learned about organic farming and gardening, and kerosene lanterns, and science fiction novels like Dune and Stranger in a Strange Land and Zen Buddhism, and so I'll throw that stuff in when I print this up. And at that point, I met Stuart Brand, who was assembling the Whole Earth catalog, which was basically, he was way ahead of me. So anyway, I didn't do that, but the reason I got into publishing was because it's easier to put it into print rather than to just go through the same thing over and over again with people.
Sure.
So with people now, I do, well, what's wrong with domes? I get that when I do a presentation on a book, that subject will come up. And I'll tell them, oh, well, it's all roof and they tend to leak and you can't subdivide them. But I'll try to get them to go read what I've written about it, because it's a much more well thought out answer to all your questions. Mm-hmm. So, a thing is, Dome Book 2 had sold 160,000 copies, and I had an epiphany that I didn't want to be telling people how to build domes because they didn't work, just so I could sell the book. So I took the book out of print, and my agent said to me, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "No, I don't want any more domes on my karma." And so that's when I went out and did Shelter. Said, "Hey, look at all these other ways to build, and we're just smart ass, hippies thinking that we're gonna, that we're gonna revolutionize housing."
Seems like you shifted from this sort of looking forward, looking at something very space age, and then shifted to looking back at, what had been built and how.
Yeah. Well, when we did Dome Book 2, we borrowed the production equipment of the Whole Earth catalog, which was the type was set on a typewriter, sort of called an IBM Composer. It cost like $9,000 for this typewriter, and it was the Selectric typewriters, they have a ball.
Yeah.
A ball, they have a ball. So that was how we did the typesetting. And when you wanted to change from Roman to italic, you changed the ball in the typewriter. And then we had a Polaroid camera. And so anyway, we took all this equipment and we rented an old resort on a lake in the mountains in Southern California. We went out to this lake, probably about 8 of us, to work on this book for a month. And as we were driving out to the resort in the van, I was looking at these buildings. We're going to do a book on domes. I'm looking at these buildings by the side of the road. They were chicken coops and barns, and that's so simple. Those guys, they put up a vertical wall, and then they built a roof that was one plane on top of that. And here we're doing these domes with struts with dihedral angles and trying to seal them. And that was a big revelation to me. And, and it was kind of good. I think what you said there, something about when you make a wrong choice, and then when you figure out that it's wrong and you figure out the right way to do it, or a lot of better ways to do it, it makes more of an impact. And so having spent 5 years with mathematics and plastics and vinyl and things like that, then going to England and going to the building museums, like the Weald and Downland Museum in Sussex, where a good friend of mine, an architect, managed that museum for decades. And these beautiful buildings, and looking at how the buildings were built, the wattle and daub. There was one house they were reconstructing this beautiful farmhouse where they had the wattle, which was interwoven branches, and they were plastering it with mud and straw and horse shit. And seeing all those things, it gave me I think an increased appreciation for building, for real building. And so then it kind of goosed me and set me off on a career of showing people all these different ways of building, and so I've been doing that for a large part of all this 50 years, and I love doing it. Going out and talking to builders and photographing them and interviewing them, and so now I'm kind of doing it again. Maybe our last book, I don't know, on people living in vans and trucks and houses, and
for me, domes they were sort of very much part of my beginning into building. I stayed in a small town in central BC called Dunster, and
what is that?
It's called Dunster, up near sort of Jasper area. And the house I stayed in, the owner's teenage son had built probably about a 13-foot dome, and I saw this thing and I thought it was just so wonderful. And then a little bit later, I got to stay in a 30-foot dome that was someone else down the way, and the feeling of it felt incredible. And those were both built from Dome Book, and so it was really, really exciting to me. And then I sort of trundled off on this journey, and then ended up very much heading down into natural materials. And I was thinking about this on the way home today, and I thought how interesting that we've sort of paralleled each other in that way. And then I realized it's not that we paralleled; it's that I've followed what you've kind of shown me.
Yeah. People can follow my checkered career. Let me just say one thing. So back in the 60s and 70s, they say the 60s happened in the 70s, which is partially true. I mean, but the 60s happened in the 60s and the 70s. But what that means is that a lot of the concepts and the ideals of the 60s were carried out in the 70s. And that really was the case for Leslie and me here. I lost my train of thought there. 60s and 70s. Oh, yeah. So back then, one of the standard visions for people would be to find 10 acres in the country and to build your house on it. Adobe in the desert, wood in the northwest, and straw bale in warm climates or whatever. And nowadays, I think that if I were a young person, and I tell this to people, maybe, okay, if you can find land in the country to build on, that's fine. But an alternative to that is to find a small house in a town or a city in a rundown neighborhood. Maybe the crack dealers have just moved out of the neighborhood, and fix it up, because you've got, and people are doing this because if the foundation is good, you've got power, sewer, and water already. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to build a septic system, and fix it up, and maybe you can get an area where a few other people would buy little houses in that neighborhood and fix them up, and you have a community vegetable garden, or do what the people did in San Francisco, 2 people buy 1 house, or, so I think that those are really good alternatives for people who are looking to create their own shelter. And, in the internet era, I think where I live around here, I can't think of one person who's building their own house right now. I mean, in the 70s, there were like 35 of us around here that were building our own house. So I don't know anybody that's doing that. I think that if you get, out away from the desirable cities, then there's certainly more possibilities of doing that. And there are people who are starting from scratch. But I have a friend who bought a house that was in bankruptcy or something in Oregon for $120,000. Now, where I live, that's nothing, because there's a tear down house in this town that's on the market for $800,000, where you're going to have to tear the house down and start, if you can buy a house for $120,000, of course, in this small town, which is the town of Colusa in the Sacramento Valley, of course, it gets to be over 100 degrees there in the summertime, and you don't have the Pacific Ocean, but still. So anyway, that's just one thing that I try to get across to people nowadays. If you're thinking of trying to create your own shelter, maybe, look around at small houses that you could fix up.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to find them in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Manhattan or Philadelphia, but look around in other places, other cities, Detroit, where there's a huge amount of homes in Detroit that are abandoned. You can buy them for $10. And of course, there's no water or sewage in those neighborhoods, but still, that's it. So anyway, that's kind of an alternative that I like to get across to people as a possibility these days. Because if you can build your own house and live in it, it just makes such a big difference in your life. Mm-hmm. If I think about the money I haven't spent making payments to a bank or rent, it's completely changed my life, and I think it's still possible to do that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more difficult, but I think you just need to be super inventive now.
Well, the other thing is to not, what we realized, we tried to make a living farming back in the 70s, and the idea was you'd be self-sufficient. And I realized you can't be self-sufficient. You can't grow your own wheat, you can't do your own dental work. And so there's some things that you have to depend on other people for. So the point is to aim for being as self-sufficient as possible, and if you live in an apartment in Manhattan, grow chives and parsley on your fire escape. Just do something, whatever it is. If you're renting an apartment, you fix it up, or do as much for yourself as you can and move in that direction. Even if you don't do what we did here, and what we did here, people come here, okay, we've been here 50 years now, and it looks pretty good to them. They don't understand how much time it took and how much effort it took to get this all up and running.
Yeah. So tiny homes is, that's a way that people are getting to build a house, going very, very small. And your book, Tiny Homes, it feels to me like one of the most influential books I read. What do you think it is, or what drew you to tiny homes? Why did you think it was an interesting topic to make a book about?
Well, there was a book called Tiny Houses by an architect called Lester Walker. That probably came out in the 80s or 90s. And the idea caught on about, 10 years ago. And I think it caught on because it caught on especially during the economic downturn, when things got really, expensive after that downturn, and all the houses were getting bigger and bigger, and so it had its moment, and everybody, there were a few there were a few people who, like one guy named Jay Schaefer, who sort of were at the spearheading that movement. And there was an article in the New Yorker on him and the concept of tiny homes. And so I think the important part of that movement was that the moving in the direction of getting smaller. Not that, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to live in a 120 square foot living space, especially if it's a couple. You know, I mean, if you're a couple, maybe you each need your own tiny home. But I think that it just was such a powerful image, and also the photographic, the photography, they're very photogenic, a tiny home. You can see what's going on there. And so for a lot of reasons, and then we hit that one right on the, you know, with when we came out with tiny homes was 2010 or something, 2012, right at the height of the excitement. There were TV shows, most of them phony, and the you know, it was a lot of interest, and so that, I think that was and the another thing is we printed these little tiny books that are 2 by 2 inches. I don't know if you've seen those.
I've never held one, but I've seen images.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I should send you a few of them. So little tiny children look at the tiny books on tiny homes, and a lot of them will look at every page in the book because they can understand it. So there's a lot of really good reasons that, you know, the tiny homes caught the fancy of the public, and they still are. You know, but we did so our book Tiny Homes was under 500 square feet. And then we did the book Small Homes several years later, which was 400 to 1,200 square feet, which is a lot more realistic for people than living in a remodeled Ford Econoline van. And so that was in my mind, a much better book, but it didn't sell nearly as well as Tiny Homes, because Tiny Homes is a buzzword. And so
yes, I think Tiny Homes sort of sparks some I don't know, it makes people excited, doesn't it? I don't know.
Yeah. And you can do it yourself, and if you put it on wheels, and you can move it, you know, if you have a disagreement with your landlord. And so
I worked out that my boat is 236 square feet of living space.
that's your walkable floor space, right?
Yes, yeah. It's
36. Wow.
236.
Is it a flat a barge?
It's a narrow boat.
Yeah. Built to carry coal or something, or
it's a newer one than that, so it's not sort of a traditional old coal one. It's built as a.
You have a motor that you can move it around with a motor?
Yes, yeah, I've taken it on some nice big trips. It's really a joy. I mean, there's definite downsides, and you have to really be on top of stuff. You know, if you let clutter build up, then it's.
Well, are they opening up any of the canals in England? I mean, there was quite a network of waterways, right, in the old days.
Yes, there's some which they're bringing back. They're recommissioning. I think.
Yeah.
For a while, canals were not a desirable place to live. They were, I think they were a bit dark, and there was lots of dark corners, and people were a bit afraid of them. But I think now the trend of people wanting to live by some water means that they're suddenly very desirable, and the house prices around canals goes right up. So
you have to pay a fee for docking.
If you move around, you can move around. Well, if every 2 weeks you move, then you don't have to pay a fee.
So it's rent free.
It's rent free to a certain extent. There's insurances and licenses, and
Yeah.
But it only works for a certain type of lifestyle. It used to work for me, and I could move around all the time, and that suited my life. But now I'm stationary now, and I'm moored up, because I couldn't keep coming back to the boat to move it, or I was away a lot. So it's a lifestyle, for sure. So you've obviously met lots of people who lived in these homes. I want to ask you about the people that build their own homes, and if you think there's a happiness that they have that you don't find elsewhere, or if there's something that sort of ties them together, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, they're all over the map. Some people are happy, some people are divorced, some people are sad. I mean, I think the same principles apply, that if you can avoid a bank loan, a mortgage, or rent, that's going to really change anybody's life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things that has occurred to me all along, especially, since computers came along, is that the computer isn't going to build your house for you. That's one thing that you need your hands for. And you need a hammer and a saw. I mean, it might be an electrical saw and a pneumatic hammer, but still, machines aren't going to build your house, even though people try to do that, but they're pretty disastrous looking. So it's kind of comforting in this, highly digitized age that, some things are, the old is new again.
Yeah.
A certain way, like they're discovering that digital recording of music is lacking in soul, whereas when they recorded with tapes and vinyl, there was something that they got that isn't obtainable when it's all in bits, black and white off and on, no shadings in between. And so it is nice I think, to discover that. Here we are in the age of Google and Facebook, and yet, Mark Zuckerberg isn't going to build your house for you.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, I wanted to ask about your favorites. I wondered if there's a favorite, builder, building.
Well, there's a house. It burned down, but it was my favorite. So this is a house. Well, your listeners can't see this, but
I'll find a picture of it for you.
Okay, this is a house built by Lloyd House.
Mm-hmm.
This one here, in Builders of the Pacific Coast. Okay, so it's a house that's on page 36 and 37. So that was just absolutely the most perfect, beautiful house. And then another one that comes to mind, there's two places that come to mind, that house and then the shop of my friend Louis, which was based, this is in Homework, and that little building there.
Uh-huh.
There's a nice story behind this building, and because he built that building based on a painting and shelter of a man down Earth Lodge. So I would say those two places are just perfect, perfect in many ways. They're the kind of places, like when I saw that one of Lloyd houses it's on an island in British Columbia, I just sat down. I was just sort of took my breath away. It was everything about it was just, a delight.
Yeah.
And so right, and so there are, Sunray Kelly, Bruno Atke, these builders that I've run across, they there are just here and there's just buildings that are just, everything is working.
Mm-hmm.
Everything looks right, everything works well, everything is a delight to the eye.
Uh-huh.
To the soul.
So there's some sort of harmony that's tying it all together.
Yeah. Lloyd House, he would build, sometimes he would find a piece of wood. He found a piece of driftwood and that piece of wood dictated his design for this building that he built, a kind of a shed retreat for some people. And Louis, well, like Louis's house, Louis's workshop did come from this Indian lodge, and also the way he treated the roof on it came from a photograph of an Iron Age hut that's in Shelter that I took in a building museum in England, where the thatch rose up over the door and came back down. And so he copied that curve with his shop. And so anyway, you know, another house that comes to mind is also in Shelter. It was a falling down house in a field somewhere maybe in the Cotswolds. And, you know, driving along and see this house, the framework was still there, and it just, you know, it was like a bolt of lightning. And I stopped the car and went over there and walked into it, and I felt like it. So it was kind of falling apart, but I could still walk up the stairs to the loft. And it was a wattle and daub, half timber frame house that the weeds were taking over, but I could feel the life of the people that had lived there. I mean, it was, you know, that was, and so I do have these moments. I'll have moments with barns sometimes. Well, I'll be in a barn and it'll just be an overwhelming sense of rightness. You know, everything is working here. Oh, I know. Yeah. Don't get me started here. Barn up in Oregon. I saw this barn. It's called the Willamette Valley in Oregon, which is south of Portland. It's a big, beautiful agricultural valley. And so what you find, barns are one of my favorite, you know, maybe my favorite type of building anywhere in the world. And so you find that in a certain area, in this area, the barns had curved roofs. And there's some builder, and the farmer would see a barn built by this builder, and he'd say, hey, can you build me one of those? So I saw this building, this barn with a curved roof, and I went over, and there was a guy next door in a wood shop. He said, yeah, you can go in. So I went inside, and again, I was just stunned by the framing of this barn, because it was framed with 1-inch lumber that was sandwiched together in a way to get the curves. And so I shot pictures in there, and I was just in heaven, you know. And everything was so right, you know, the color of the wood, the spacing of the rafters, the shingles, you know. So I definitely do. I do fall in love with buildings, like the same way I fall in love with places. Sometimes, you know, there'll be a place, a canyon or a beach or a hill. There'll be something very special about it, and sometimes builders pull that off. And then very often it'll be in barns where they're trying to be practical. You know, they're not architects trying to do something that looks contemporary or is the latest fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way you've described that roof, it reminds me of the sort of Bill Copperthwaite way of.
Oh yeah.
You know, he used a lot of dimensioned, quite thin boards, didn't he, to create his yurts?
Well, it's yurts. I visited him. I stayed for maybe half a week at his place in Maine there, and he was a wonderful guy, and he was very tuned into the old ways of doing things, like making spoons, and he did a book 10 years ago or so, and he left a great legacy behind.
Mm-hmm. That yurt he lived in, the multi-story. That
yurt.
Yeah, to call it a yurt doesn't really sort of bring the picture to mind for people listening at home.
That was quite a building.
It's like a temple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Yeah, I really kind of wish I had built, when I had what we called circle madness. I wish I had built yurts instead of domes. You know, they were a lot more natural. Well, and you know Sunray Kelly?
Yes.
Who Sunray Kelly is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, pretty much everything he builds is a yurt structure with a ring in the center and a tension band on the outside walls connected. So that, I mean, that's the way the Mongolian yurt is done, and sun rays, and Bill's yurts were that way. And sun rays, even his big buildings, the beautiful, oh yeah, there was another beautiful building that's gone now, was the temple he built at the Harbin Hot Springs, and it was destroyed in the fire. It was a large building with the same thing, a circle in the middle and a cable around the outside, and the connection of the tension and compression was a brilliant, going to back to the Mongolian yurts, or gurs as they're called.
I mean, what is it, or why people are drawn to building circular buildings and being in circular buildings?
I don't know. I mean, I think that your head is spherical in a way. It's kind of like a equidistant from your head. It's a circle. I mean, circles definitely do feel different to be inside. There's no corners for energy to die out in. And I mean, and there are domes that I do like. There's a dome, I think it's in Builders of the Pacific Coast. There's a dome on an island in British Columbia that's a beautiful little dome. It's covered with shingles, and there are domes that I do like, and I still get a good feeling inside them. I think that but for a circle, I think you can't beat a teepee. And that was another one of the things that happened to me when I was in the middle of my dome building career. Is I spent a night in a teepee, and I had started having my doubts about domes with all the leaking problems and everything. And so I was sleeping in this teepee, and the moon was out, and I was lying there looking up at the moonlight coming through the canvas, and the poles of the teepee were just kind of, they weren't engineered or measured or anything. They were just, connected. And so looking at the moonlight and the unevenness of the poles was just this way better feeling than being in a geodesic dome. And it was a circle. And so there certainly is something going on with circles that, but as far as a home to live in, where you've got refrigerators and beds and stoves, and I do want to have more than one big open space. I do like having a bedroom be separate from the kitchen, and if you want to subdivide your home, you've got problems if it's a circle. If you want to subdivide a dome, say I want to put a wall up, when you get over to the surface of the dome for your wall to connect to it, you've got all these different angles to attach to, and if you want to add on to it, it's the same thing. You have to deal with all the angles of the roof changes. Whereas if I have a vertical wall and I want to add on to that vertical wall, I just put a roof off of it. In other words, it's just one plane to attach to. And that's just one of the things about, so, okay, yeah, circles are great, but for meditation, for a yoga studio, for a music studio, but if you're going to be cooking and sleeping and storing your clothes and maybe adding a little room on for a kid, then I don't want a circle. Actually, I have the remnants of a circle is I have a hexagonal tower here, 3-story tower. It's a hexagon, and we sleep in the second story.
Yeah.
So that is a circle, and it's wonderful. It is wonderful, even though it's been a pain in the ass. Everything I want to attach to that tower is at an odd angle.
So it's a pain in the ass, but the feeling is worth it.
Yeah, some things are really difficult, but when you get them finished, okay, this is all right. So everybody has to
find their threshold,
figure out their own balance. Kind of walking a tightrope between abstraction and the ideal and reality and practicality. Everybody's going to have a different, you know, take on how much of each to incorporate.
Sure, yeah. How does it feel for you to sort of know that that you've influenced so many people in so many buildings, and that you're part of that kind of development?
Oh, it's great. It's just unbelievable. I mean, every day we're getting people writing and saying, you know, I was influenced by you. You know, I've been reading your book. You know, my parents had your shelter book when I was growing up. So that sort of thing, you know, I mean, that makes it all worthwhile. If we can inspire people to do something for themselves, and that does seem to have worked over all the years. And so it's sort of, you know, I mean, really, it's just kind of, it's overwhelming, the feedback we've been getting.
Yeah.
It's very gratifying.
And so, well, to know that you've influenced people, I'm interested to know what inspires you.
I guess, you know, I mean, things that people do are inspiring. I consider myself a communicator, really, more than a publisher, editor, photographer. And I like to go, I go around in the world, and almost every day I see things that I think are just wonderful. You know, somebody has built a pickup truck camper, or somebody's got a display in a window in New York, in Manhattan, that's really well done, or, you know, an architect has done something, or a builder has done something, or a photographer has taken a picture. I mean, all those things, I find those things inspiring, and I like to tell people about what I see in the world. And I, you know, so every day is different. I wish I kind of, in a way, I wish I could just do a blog and make a living from doing it. The trouble is I've done 6,000 blog posts. There's no income from it. I don't have enough of an audience to be an influencer, but I would love to do that. If I go out and hear, I remember, like, down in Mexico one time, we were eating at an outdoor restaurant. I was with my Mexican friend, and there was a concrete block building across the road that was being built. A lot of concrete block masonry in this part of Mexico and Baja is not very well crafted. These bricks were just perfect. The sieves were, you know, everything really looked good. And the builder was there. I met the builder, and so I said to the builder, I said, that's really good masonry there. And he was so surprised to have somebody notice it. But, you know, it's kind of, I love going around and seeing things, like seeing excellence, or seeing wonderful art, or seeing something like that, and then putting it up on my blog, or putting it on Instagram, or the long haul, getting it into a book. You know, like I saw a pickup truck with a really nice camper shell 2 days ago downtown here. I took a picture of it, copper roof, put it up on Instagram. Did I tell you this already? And yeah, and so it produced, you know, so I'm telling people I'm inspired by this, and I'm communicating it to people and saying, you know, I mean, it's kind of almost one of the first things that comes to mind when I see something great is, how can I tell people about this? So I find inspiration, you know, everywhere, all the time.
It's great. I've been reading your blog for a long time, and it's always just a joy to see how many different things have captured you.
I'll tell you another inspiring thing. It's on Netflix. It's called
My Octopus Teacher.
Yeah. Okay, so there's something that's inspiring, you know. And yesterday, someone sent me a video of a bobcat and a rattlesnake, and that was so incredible to see the way this bobcat dodged the rattlesnake strikes and finally killed it. You know, I mean, there's something every day. There's something inspiring every day if you just look around and can use it for energy.
Staying interested in the world, and
yeah.
I feel like maybe you've got I think this is a compliment, but you could a sort of like childlike view on the world when
Oh yeah,
when you're still excited by things. I think
yeah,
that's really wonderful.
yeah. You never want to lose that, being a boy, or being a well, I've looked at babies. If you look at a baby like a month-old baby, and they look at you, they're really seeing you in a way that you can't imagine, because I think as you grow up, you start putting up these barriers, this armor, so that you don't look at the world. When I first took LSD, I saw a flower breathing. Okay, that wasn't a hallucination. The flower was breathing, but I just never saw it before. And I think that that's the way babies look at the world when they don't have all the armor. They see things really the way they are. And so I think that's good to retain that, to not get so saddled down with, closing down your perceptions that you don't see the wonders of daily life.
Oh, I've really enjoyed that. I hope you have done too. Massive thanks to Lloyd for taking the time out of his day. I actually sent Lloyd a link to my website before this conversation because I wanted to show him a roundhouse that I led the build for with my old company, Hartwin. And he said this.
Oh, that roundhouse you sent me is really nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's really that's the nicest one I've seen.
Oh.
A lot of those houses like that are pretty funky.
Yes.
There's someone in England that builds, round houses with dirt sod roofs that don't look anything like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty spiffy and together looking.
Oh my goodness, that made my day. Oh, someone I hold in such high esteem, saying such nice things about my work. So I found it pretty interesting how Lloyd has developed from this extraordinarily technical dome building, and as he says, abstract homes, to sort of recognizing the benefits of simple materials, but then also what he was saying about simple, square, straight buildings and how they can benefit people. It's very much the opposite from what I took from those books. I was deeply inspired to find natural forms and to take the extra time to work with them because of the beauty that it creates. And it is harder. And so I do equally see his point of view that, especially in terms of cost to build, if you keep the design simple, if you keep the edges straight, then it keeps the cost down. Unless, of course, you're building your own home. And within that you don't count your own time as a cost, which maybe is a rarity these days, and certainly with the rising costs of building plots and houses, maybe it's good to be more focused on building simple. So there is about 15 minutes of extra audio on the Patreon site. That is patreon.com/building sustainability. And in that, Lloyd talks about his trip to England and some other bits and pieces which you might be interested in. And just a final reminder that if you're new here, subscribe, check out the other conversations. And until next time, stay healthy.